come back to Zhang Yiming early like Weibo posts, back when Weibo wasn't all that censored. And, he was making all these comments about like, look, criticizing the government, saying that there should be more freedom of expression in China. And, you can find those posts from basically every Chinese CEO of his era. Where these folks, they worked at Western technology companies. A lot of them actually even spent time in the US or in Silicon Valley. And the sort of ideological mindset of the hope of the sort of future that they envisioned for China was much more akin to the sort of peaceful evolution that the US was hoping. And these innovators were the closest I think that America has really gotten to sort of creating a class of individuals in society which deeply internalized a lot of the liberal values that America holds most dear. And for us to get to a point where we are now, where we're telling these folks, no, you can't do this because your country has gone so off the rails that there's no way we could ever trust you. It's a real shame that this is where we are today, because these guys were probably like the best hope that America had for, potentially bending China in a different direction. And I think Xi recognized that, which is why we've had all these tech crackdowns over the past few years, because he understood that the Zhang Yimings and Ma Yuns of the world were not sort of on board with his mission of how he wanted to define, Chinese greatness. And unfortunately, we don't have Chairman Jack Ma running the shots of China. We have Xi Jinping. And that's the sort of reality that innovators as well as American policymakers are going to be having to grapple with for years and years to come. Hello and welcome to China Talk. Today I have on the great Kevin Xu of the Interconnected Substack. He also works at GitHub. And we're going to be talking about today's TikTok hearing. We're recording this. We started during the halftime intermission of the House's long-awaited chance to grill TikTok's CEO. We're going to be getting into the sort of dynamics that led to the hearing, do a little bit of Monday morning quarterbacking on TikTok's lobbying performance over the past few years, as well as talk about more broadly what this moment and the Restrict Act means for the future of the US and Chinese technological ecosystems. Kevin, thanks so much for coming on China Talk.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me back, Jordan. And just a quick disclaimer for everybody who's listening live or in the recording. I do not speak for GitHub or Microsoft. I am here on my personal capacity, expressing personal opinions only.
So, Kevin, what do you think of this hearing?
First of all, I think it's clear and unequivocal at this point that TikTok as a company or as a product, because of its Chinese ownership, is being held to a completely different standard or playing field than all its other peer company here in the US, whether that's Meta, Snapchat, or other sort of social media company. That is something that I think coming back to how TikTok has prepared for this hearing, they might have tried to actually argue that, everybody else is doing the same thing that we're doing. And therefore, whatever we're doing as TikTok is, just part of an industry problem. But at least on the Republican side, it's pretty clear now, which has been implicit before, but I think much more on the record, that TikTok, because of its ownership, is being held to a completely different standard. Whatever that standard is still to be determined. But I think the argument that just because we're doing it, but Facebook's also doing it, we should be talking about it all together. That argument from TikTok is falling flat, as evident by this hearing, at least so far.
Yeah, I mean, what's remarkable to me is that it took this long. We're here in March 2023. Trump almost banned the app in 2020. And the sort of groundswell of sort of political consensus making, like all the facts have been there for years now. But the sort of metabolism of the, policy media ecosystem to what TikTok is, what constraints it operates under, and the, power and influence that this platform has. Watching that sort of move forward in fits and starts over a multi-year process has been really fascinating and a really interesting civics lesson for me in what it takes to go from sort of an idea to consensus to action. And just over the past week, we finally seen that the Biden administration has made a decision that Project Texas, which which TikTok has been pushing for the past few years, is not going to cut it.
Yeah, and I think this has to do, in my opinion, with also the legal sort of justification of either banning or forcing a sale of TikTok, which actually gets into the Restrict Act that was proposed by the Senate, right? But let me first kind of talk about the Project Texas angle too. I think that's pretty interesting, especially coming from listening to this hearing is still going on right now. But one of the talking points that is very clear that Zhou Shouzi, which is the Chinese pronunciation of the guy's name, is falling back on is Project Texas, right? He's like, right now we're still basically not being able to guarantee that there's no access to American data. But once Project Texas is done, we're spending billions of dollars on it. No one else in our industry is doing it. So he's trying to say that once we finish Project Texas, we'll be good. And, the question here is, one, why is it taking so long for Project Texas to be finished, since that, it's like at least a year and a half project at this point? And also, if that is going to be the linchpin to solve TikTok's problem, let's just say, why go up at the hearing now and wait for it to, either be finished and then report to the American public or to Congress, or give a much more precise progress report even, right? Like it's 60% done, it's 80% done. I think with the other commitment that he made that was maybe marginally newsmaking is that TikTok is also planning to delete all American user data that's currently being stored in this Virginia data center that's not Oracle run, therefore not Project Texas, and the backup in the Singapore data center. So it's an ongoing project, which makes the TikTok CEO's job today, quite frankly, way more difficult than it probably could have been.
Yeah, I mean, this is sort of the weirdest thing of all of it, is like they caught a real break by having Trump sort of get distracted and, Larry Ellison whisper in his ear that like he had a solution. And they had 3 years to put in place a better sort of, better fact pattern to be able to go to these sorts of debates and, testify in front of Congress and give a more convincing pitch that, look, we get it and we're doing something about it. And, maybe they just thought they could be cute and, be really quiet and eventually sort of end up at a place where this fell off the headlines. And maybe, if U.S.-China relations had developed in a different way than it had over the past few years, that might have been a more feasible strategy. Or maybe, this, whatever Project Texas is so many billions of dollars that the sort of utility and having a better talking point to congressional staffers wasn't worth the like expected value. The expected value of that wasn't worth the $5-10 billion or whatever that it would take to hire all these new American engineers and port everything out of China. But the fact is that we're sitting here in March of 2023 with the CEO being unable to definitively answer questions about engineers based on the mainland having access to the algorithm and data that these Congress people are so focused on. And it didn't have to be that. Kevin, you've been talking a lot over the past few years, and we've done shows about this, of the idea that they could have decided to kind of do what Elon is ostensibly going to be doing with TikTok, which is open sourcing the entire algorithm. So talk me through a little bit about how that, what that road not taken could have looked like and why that might have been a potential solution for ByteDance to ameliorate some of these concerns.
I think one of the things, and I've heard this from a lot of Chinese entrepreneurs and business people, not just, at the TikTok level, when Trump lost the 2020 election and Biden became president, there was this false sense of comfort that U.S.-China relations will get kind of magically better, right, overnight. And I think that might have lulled a lot of the TikTok and Biden's leadership into thinking that this is something that they can negotiate away, right? Which, there is technically still a pending negotiation with the Biden administration to talk about this. But think it's very clear that if the administration, the Biden administration, could have banned this app, they probably would have done it by now. But because the Trump attempt to ban the app was struck down by not one but two federal judges for kind of abuse of the economic emergency powers act, right, which is sort of his justification for how he as president could do this, and it clearly didn't work. Obviously, the Biden administration wouldn't try to do it again because only because you avoid the embarrassment that their order could also be struck down by the court. And now that we have a proposal like the Restrict Act, which came out of the Senate a few weeks ago, that more explicitly gives the president and the executive branch the power to do these sort of things. And if that bill gets passed, then it's just a much easier legal process to ban not just TikTok, but any kind of Chinese tech company and their product in the United States if there is enough justification of a national security concern to push them out. And that's sort of the game that I think is so DC inside baseball, right? Like, how could the president just be able to struck down by the court? Oh, we have a new friendlier president potentially than Trump, and life is going to be okay. I think that was what happened in the last 2 to 3 years, and it's now coming to light again, where that was a false, almost a fantasy that a lot of these folks were living in, and it's coming to a head right now with the TikTok hearing.
So, Kevin, what's in the Restrict Act, and what stuck out to you about it?
So the Restrict Act is a proposal from the Senate and introduced by Senator Mark Warner from the Democratic side, Senator Zhang Yiming from the Republican side. It also already has the enthusiastic endorsement of Senator John Manchin, which, depending on the day, you don't really know if he's Republican or Democrat or wherever he feels like he wants to be. But it's a act, it's a proposal, it's a bill, it's not a law, it's a bill that basically gives the president and the executive branch, namely the Department of Commerce, very wide range of power to determine what kind of technology products or services from America's foreign adversary, right? That's a very specific set of definition that includes the People's Republic of China, also Hong Kong and Macau, Russia, Cuba, Iran, North Korea, and Venezuela under Maduro. Anything from those countries, the president now has the power to review and to figure out whether they pose any national security threat, and to have the power to deal with it, accordingly, right? Which could be a sale, it could be a ban, it could be whatever the executive branch sees fit. And what really struck out, really was interesting to me from this bill, is that the definition, the list of things that could fall under the covered technology areas for this bill is extremely comprehensive. It basically covers everything that any technology company could make under the sun, right? So it's not just kind of a usual suspect of networking equipment or drones or other sort of hardware that we've come to be familiar with as potential foreign adversary spywares, let's just say, that's in the United States. But it includes certainly social media platforms, includes e-commerce technology and services, includes a bunch of strategic areas like AI, quantum computing, cryptography, biotech, all that sort of stuff. And it also includes cloud services as well. So CDN, kind of SaaS product, and even the companies that manage open source software, which, technically is not actually owned by the company. Right? Open source is just this thing that's a piece of code that you can access on the internet to use as you see fit for the most part. I'm glossing over a bunch of details on open source, but I think generally speaking, that's how you could understand open source in this context. Even companies that are commercializing or utilizing open source for their business gains are now under the coverage of this act, which to me is basically spelled game over for any Chinese tech company, not just the big ones, but even the relatively small ones, the startup ones that want to gain some market share here in the US.
So I moved to China in 2017, and even then she had just changed the constitution. The dark clouds were on the horizon, but even then, like, there was still this vision that maybe some sort of interconnected commercial technological interaction between China and the rest of the world could potentially kind of create or build the context in which the U.S. and China could relate to each other on better terms. And this hearing and the Restrict Act really marked, to me, an end of an era. Not that we need any more. Maybe you can put that at maybe you can date it from No Limits Friendship and Putin and the war in Ukraine, but the sort of consensus that has been manifested with this bill and TikTok being banned, I think are a real marker for just how far we've gone and how much it's going to take to shake this consensus of just the idea that's made it into the American political bloodstream that U.S.-Chinese technological interaction is somewhat akin to like doing deals with the enemy, and everything, any sort of commercial or technological engagement needs to be viewed through that lens because of the broader challenges that are facing the U.S. and China. And, we've done lots of other shows on China Talk that have explored, why that is, whether or not it's justified, is this is this the U.S. that really bears the brunt of the blame here. But the consensus that the consensus that's developed seems very, seems strong, and it's like from a normative sense, I think where I am on this is it kind of has to happen. But there's something that I find about the moment we're in, which is so sad, because I don't think it's inevitable that the U.S. and China had to end up where we are today. And I'm gonna put it like 90-10 on Xi and Beijing's shoulders for pushing us to this moment. But when I look at the likes of Zhang Yiming and this TikTok CEO who seems like a really nice guy, it's like we would be in a much nicer world if the two countries and the two systems were in a place where they could be able to build trust in each other. And this guy could be thinking about how to, make creators more money and, not have to spend all his time on completely justified sort of concerns about data privacy and algorithmic bias. But that's not the world, and that's not the timeline that we're in. And there's something about the discourse in the U.S. around the U.S.-China relationship, which isn't quite grappling with like the tragedy of all of this. And, it's probably, I think that the most tragic thing is not necessarily just the U.S.-China tech relationship. It's the trajectory of Chinese governance over the past, 10, 15 years. But it is something that is deeply sad, that this is the place that we're all in.
I think the marker of this being an end of an era with the TikTok hearing today, the Restrict Act or something like it possibly becoming law, is not that hyperbolic, to be honest. And this might be because I'm more deeper in the tech industry these days. Obviously, I had a past life in DC, but I work with a lot of entrepreneurs, not just from China, but from a lot of different places around the world as well. I have held hope that while products like TikTok, which poses much more obvious national security threats, could be dealt in one bucket, there are a bunch of different industries, whether it's e-commerce or cloud SaaS or what have you, that are just in a much more innocuous part of the tech industry, where these are just entrepreneurs trying to make products, trying to expand their services, trying to make more money, trying to justify their valuation with their VC investors. These are just kind of normal behaviors, right, in business that used to be much more free-flowing. But now, certainly based on my understanding or reading of the Restrict Act, they're all being shoved under this much larger movement of increasingly adversarial relationship between the two countries that sucks up all these normally very ordinary activities into this context. And I think that is a new level of separation that certainly I have not seen, not just in the past 3 years, but in the past, 30 years, probably. Uh, and it's something that I think just needs to be recognized at this point. There's not a whole lot of wishful thinking. I think the reality is reality, and a lot of people need to change their plans that they might have drummed up and dreamed up, that Zhang Yiming dreamed up to be a global company to 10 or 12 years ago. Needs to change because that's just the world we live in right now. And that has nothing to do with whether TikTok is a national security threat or not, which there's perfectly enough evidence to suggest that it is. I think there still could be more validation on that claim. Again, we could have dealt with it singularly, right? And,
Yeah.
coming back to all the stuff that we've talked about TikTok specifically in the last 3 years, there are opportunities where TikTok could have led the pack or really stayed in front of this problem as well. Whether it's open sourcing their recommendation algorithm, which I've talked about before with you, whether it's open sourcing even the access level between their Chinese engineering forces and their American engineering forces to show a little bit more actual transparency, not to spend money building a quote unquote transparency center just to parade a few journalists around and watch videos about terms and services. Those would actually be ways to technically verify, these claims. And again, it is TikTok going well beyond the norm of the industry, which I can understand why they would feel kind of maybe victimized to do. They're like, why are we being held up to a different standard? Why not? Why is Facebook and Snapchat not doing this? But that is just the world that we live in. It is that if you do want to operate here as a Chinese-owned company, you will have to go well beyond the norm, the standard, to demonstrate your trustworthiness. And there are ways to do that via open source, via other ways of communicating this on a technical level. And we're just, but fortunately, that didn't happen with TikTok, right? So here we are.
Yeah. Sort of one side note, and is an interesting sort of like Xi governance thing ending up in this is like everyone's citing the national security law, right? Like Chinese government can basically make private companies do whatever they want if it's in the interest of national security. And Xi didn't need this law to make companies do what he wanted them to do. But the sort of vision of the legalization of Chinese governance is something that he's been very focused on as a sort of like way of being for the party. And it's not rule of law, it's rule by law, right? Of like, we want to create the legal framework to understand and justify everything that we're doing. But, now fast forward 5 years, 6 years later, and saying the quiet part out loud of the Chinese government's influence over every aspect of sort of Chinese corporate and private life ends up leading to the case where you have the CEO of TikTok basically being forced to answer questions which are unanswerable because at the end of the day, ByteDance has no recourse when it ends up getting those sorts of requests and directives.
And that's the thing, right, Jordan? Like, kind of coming back to the hearing, right? As live folks tune in, the hearing is still happening. I got like this morning when the news dropped that the Chinese Commerce Ministry issued an official statement about, any sort of TikTok sale or divestiture being basically dead on arrival from a Chinese regulatory perspective. It was quite a PR curveball thrown at the TikTok CEO the morning before he has to go to the Hill. Like, that to me was just like, wow, you're really not trying to make this guy's job any easier than it already. And like, what is the timing of that? Was actually a little bit curious. I don't know if you thought much about the timing of that particular statement, which could have happened, frankly, any day. And of course, a lot of members on the hearing committee seized on that statement, right? To really push him to answer a question that is literally impossible for him to answer, and basically kind of undermines any sort of valid case that you could have made about the separation between TikTok, the company, and the Chinese Communist Party, which is that the Chinese Communist Party literally just said, you can't be sold without
Yeah.
our permission. What do you say to that? And well, yeah, and of course,
Well, I mean,
he's
this comes back to the Monday morning quarterback thing. I think he has a better answer for that. He's like, look, in the US, like technology transfer sales like have to go through sorts of regulatory controls, and like we have the same thing in the PRC. But it leads you to the same point. It leads you back to the same question which all the Congress people have, which is an unanswerable one, which is, look, these algorithms were created by Chinese engineers who have access to them on a daily basis. And there have been lots of stories about how sort of algorithmic tweaks happen in China that the US employees like have no idea what is going on under the hood of their own app. And that's something, again, that they could have done something about over the past 3 or 4 years. Like, it's not impossible, but it's, for whatever reason, a calculation that they decide wasn't in TikTok's interest, and now they're having to pay the price for that. Broadening it out a little bit, Kevin, we're sort of at this inflection point where more and more of U.S. and China sort of technological interconnect points are going to be unwound. But there are still really dramatic dependencies on both sides of the equation, which aren't going to be, which neither country is going to be able to kind of like wriggle their way out of anytime soon. Maybe start off talking about batteries and what sort of themes that illustrates about just how reliant these two countries are still going to end up being on each other to sort of realize their national goals.
That's right. So, as this larger trend of deglobalization and, interconnected points being broken down, one, I'm seriously rethinking the name of my newsletter, whether it should still be called Interconnected or Interconnected with a question mark. But on the battery points specifically, I think that is one of those industries, and we're talking specifically about electric vehicle batteries, where there is so much lead that China has built in that industry, that as the United States tried to electrify itself with the Inflation Reduction Act, the subsidies that are being rolled out as we speak to the American consumers to buy EVs made by domestic brands like Ford and GM and whatnot, there is a awkward reliance that is hard for U.S. politicians to recognize of how much U.S. automakers, frankly, simply do not have access to enough domestic technology to acquire reliable batteries for their EVs, and they must rely on kind of global leaders like CATL, which is a Chinese company that is by far the largest supplier of EV batteries in the world, rely on their technology to be able to make the American dream of electrification come true. And the evidence, I'll actually point to two recent evidence. One, a lot of folks might have heard about, which is Ford has decided to build EV battery in Michigan with CATL's technology to be able to simply supply enough functioning battery for the next generation of Mach 3 or it's Mach E, I think, and also the EV pickup truck, the Ford 150. And a more recent news is at I think this was just reported on today. Ford had a battery incident where a bunch of trucks were caught on fire. They paused the production, and the batteries were being supplied by the South Korea battery giant SK, or the company is actually called SKON or SKON is their battery subsidiary. And it's been, diagnosed now and published by the U.S. regulators that these batteries are defective and is one of the causes, at least, of the fire, which kind of further pours oil on the fire, so to speak, that even the alliance that the U.S. has built around the world with South Korea, Japan, and other countries, that isn't enough to really catch up to the lead that China has built in this particular industry of EV battery making, to be able to help Americans electrify. So that is one industry where, the practicality of decoupling or deglobalization is about to really hit, where we see the rubber meets the road, because it's very kind of easy to talk about it in a congressional setting, even in a legislative setting, whether it's giving money away. to incentivize or to push company out in the context of Restrict Act. But if you need a battery, you need a battery. You don't want to roll out trucks that's going to set on fire. And there is this one source of reliable battery, and it just happens to be from your foreign adversary. So there's still threads of interconnectedness, but it's sort of dangling on these very loose, rope lines, technological reliance. That's hard to catch up. And it's hard to kind of really recognize honestly, too, if you are someone who is in DC and trying to drum up all these narratives about deglobalization, decoupling.
Yeah. One of the most interesting one, transitioning to talking a little about AI, is the idea that Chinese firms are going to be increasingly reliant on US cloud providers to have access to the latest and greatest NVIDIA chips that are going to be run from data centers in, Singapore. Given the sort of export control restrictions, there'll be some wiggle room, I think, with chips to sort of stay around the capabilities that have been developed in 2020 and 2021, but it won't take very long for the hacks that NVIDIA has done to get its chips, just under the limits that the Commerce Department has set, for that stuff to just be out of date and not nearly as performant or as energy efficient as what you can get from the latest and greatest technologies. And the solution now is for sort of foreign cloud providers to allow the Tencents and Ollie's and ByteDances of the world to train their models just outside of China, because of course China can't develop leading edge chips and supercomputers without access to the likes of TSMC. But I find it very hard to imagine a world in which 2 to 3 years from now, when it becomes even clearer that these models and the inference needed to power them on a sort of nationwide scale is something that the US is providing China, if that's going to be something that is going to fly when Jensen Huang inevitably in 2024 will be called in front of Congress to ask why he is doing stuff, which is sort of powering the Chinese economy.
Yeah, I think that's another one where the interconnectedness still holds, but it's just kind of 2 layers beneath the surface. I shouldn't be surprised by this, but I was surprised to read that, of course, you could just rent the fucking GPUs in a data center in Singapore or in Dubai or in wherever that is not the United States and not in China. That is so obvious. And you just put in a credit card and AWS or, GCP will gladly take your money to run those workloads and never ask a question, right? Or even or you can do it via partners where they're domiciled elsewhere outside the United States and the US. And this is something that is very standard in the industry of cloud computing, infrastructure, data infrastructure. There are just webs of partners and global service integrators. These are called GCIs, huge Indian companies. Accenture, they do this stuff for a living. And, initially when we all heard about the news about NVIDIA, the sanction cannot sell the highest end GPU to China, we're like, oh crap, this is it. But then it's like, oh yeah, they just live in the cloud. You rent them for the most part anyways, if you are a company. Now, it does still handicap national initiatives where you do want to own the hardware to develop your supercomputer. I think that will get set back a few years perhaps in China. But NVIDIA has a monopoly on the entire hardware side of, AI training and inference generating right now. There's no question about it. You just look at the stock, it's going up and up, doesn't matter what the Fed is saying. And that's the reality of business. And that's another thing where I don't know if whoever's doing the enforcement in the Commerce Department, not really aware that you could just rent server, you don't have to buy them, and the effect is pretty much the same, maybe a little bit more expensive, but that is where we are heading to. So I guess this would just be a business boom to all the, cloud regions in Singapore and Southeast Asia, and maybe even Japan or, South Korea.
Yeah, I mean, I think the justification around the regulations was like, look, these are national security concerns. We're doing this for national security, and the PLA can't be that dumb to run their sort of like ballistic modeling in Singapore, because America will like find out about that, and then like we'll be able to see their ballistic modeling or whatever. But
Maybe not. I think that could be right.
yeah,
Right? Like that part of the modeling or that AI initiative in China will probably never leave the border for obvious reasons. But it doesn't necessarily handicap your, your sense times of the world,
yeah.
right? Who
And that's what
are
we've seen
yeah.
is all of these entity listed companies basically being able to access whatever NVIDIA compute they want via subsidiaries or changing the name of their company so it's not on the entity list anymore, and just finding a friendly cloud service provider to run to run these models for them.
Yeah. And and these presents like these sanction laws are easy to pass in climate that we have in DC right now, but it's a lot of work to regulate and actually force and implement. And for one reason or another, the Commerce Department, which I did spend a little bit of time working in the past, is really becoming kind of the most popular department or agency in DC these days in ways that, again, beyond my wildest expectation. We used to be not that cool and kind of a backwater agency. And now, like, we've been talked about in like every single, hot issue of the entire country. So, gonna really staff up now.
Yeah, no, I mean they had this they had this new budget request for more money for BIS, but the one thing that really struck out to me was this $2.4 million line item for thinking about emerging technologies. And my first response was like, okay, I'm glad you guys are wanting to think about emerging technologies, but if you actually want to control them, you're going to need a lot more than $2.4 million to do the analysis to understand exactly how these industries work and the trend lines that you may want to bend to make sure that you're advancing U.S. national and economic interests. And yeah, I don't think $2.4 million would even get you halfway there just on this cloud compute question, which we've been talking about.
Yeah. And we're only talking about defense, right, Jordan? There's the
Yeah.
offensive side of this relationship with the CHIPS Act, which you've written a bunch about and posted even job descriptions on behalf of the Commerce Department to help them recruit, which is that there's still the offensive part. We still need to build our advanced manufacturing capacity in the United States. Yes, the law has been passed, the money has been allocated, but how are we actually going to properly and intelligently allocate the $52 billion or the $39.6 billion that go directly to manufacturing subsidies? This requires really smart people that we actually have not staffed up. And that's another part that I'm a little bit surprised by. Again, that shouldn't be, which is that, we actually passed the allocation first, and then we hire the people to do the allocating. Maybe is just how we're going to have to work on these things these days. The pace of bills and regulations are outpacing the number of people who can really do the job.
Any other points you want to hit, Kevin? What else is on your mind?
I know it's a personal issue in a sense, right? For both of us. You've worked in Chinese tech companies in the past. I've worked with a lot of them as well. And there's always an assumption that there's at least a certain part of the economy between these two countries that could just stay benign.
Yeah.
But I don't think that is the reality that we are walking into, whether we like it or not. And that's just something that we need to recognize and operate under.
Come back to Zhang Yiming's early Weibo posts, back when Weibo wasn't all that censored. And, he was making all these comments about look, criticizing the government, saying that there should be more freedom of expression in China. And, you can find those posts from basically every Chinese CEO of his era, where these folks, they worked at Western technology companies. A lot of them actually even spent time in the US or in Silicon Valley. And the sort of ideological mindset of the hope of the sort of future that they envisioned for China was not it was much more akin to the sort of peaceful evolution that the U.S. was hoping, and these innovators were the closest I think that America has really gotten to sort of creating a class of individuals in society which deeply internalized a lot of the liberal values that America holds most dear. And for us to get to a point where we are now, where we're telling these folks, no, you can't do this because your country has been ruled, because the country of your leadership has gone so off the rails that there's no way we could ever trust you. It's just it's a real shame that this is where we are today, because these guys were probably like the best hope that America had for potentially bending China in a different direction. And I think Xi recognized that, which is why we've had all these tech crackdowns over the past few years, because he understood that these people, that the Zhang Yimings and Ma Yuns of the world were not sort of on board with his mission of how he wanted to define, Chinese greatness. And, unfortunately, we don't have Chairman Jack Ma running the shots of China. We have Xi Jinping. And that's the sort of reality that that sort of innovators as well as American policymakers are going to be having to grapple with for years and years to come.
Yeah, folks like Zhang Yiming and others would have the best ally of the United States in its way of dealing with U.S.-China relations. But instead, we are also doing our best to push them away, all to Singapore, apparently. They are kind of unappreciated, I just say, right? Like in both their home and their target market, with that are just unfortunate. So with that, thanks for having me back on the show, Jordan. Always good to hang out with you to riff on some of this stuff.
Last thing, let's just talk about AI for a second. I don't know, you're at GitHub. You guys created like the first real product that people are using. Any thoughts, reflections on GPT-4 and what it means for maybe not just U.S.-China relations, but like humanity or U.S.-China relations? I don't know.
Again, I'm just speaking on my own personal view here about anything and everything not related to GitHub or Microsoft. But I will share one thing with you that I think is relevant to the audience. Is that so? You know how I write this newsletter is actually bilingual, right? So Connected has every post that is both in English and in Chinese that's written by myself. And one new workflow I have incorporated recently with ChatGPT-4 in particular is to ask it to translate a first draft from English to Chinese for me before I kind of edit and publish. And I found the result, I wouldn't say absolutely better than alternatives, but surprisingly more fun to do.
Yeah.
And also some of the expressions are a little bit more colloquial in Chinese, which, makes sense for my purpose, because I'm writing a personal newsletter. I'm not trying to write an academic paper or a newsletter or news article or something more formal. And I did find using ChatGPT-4 to help me, produce a first draft in Chinese has really boosted my either productivity level or at least my happiness level when I'm doing. Because this is actually a cool way to say it. Oh, this sounds about right for me and my taste. So I really enjoyed that on the personal side of things. That's been the most kind of integrated habit that I've had with the GPT-4 chatbot so far.
Yeah, it is really interesting how it translates from English to Chinese, because like you never get broken sentences.
That's right.
The English and the Chinese, it's never like it like sometimes it doesn't capture the meaning as well, but it's always like a sentence that a real person would write, which is not something that you get from Google Translate or Baidu Translate or DeepL or whatever, all these other ones that I've tried and been, successfully disappointed by. And I think that's just like, it's a really remarkable thing. And it's kind of incredible just imagining where we're going to be 6 months or a year from now, because I think we're definitely in sight of getting to like 99.5%, where, maybe pretty soon the only stuff that you don't end up needing to go over a second time is like, let me put it this way. Like, I can envision a world where all that's left that really needs humans to look at is like literature and poetry that really has those like double, triple meanings that you're going to really want to capture that maybe the computer might struggle with. But sort of the stuff that I do on China Talk of like, yeah, I'm translating some WeChat article or whatever, and like getting the gist is much more important than like the deeper subtlety. We're very close to not needing a human in the loop in that at all.
That's right. And I think 2 points I'll make, Jordan. One is that I think the colloquialness, right, that we're talking about with the Chinese translation of ChatGPT-4 really speaks to the unique power of large language models more than any other approach to AI or machine learning that we've done so far, right? Because the large language model is all about basically mimicking the most quality data that's put it into the model as training, and then output something that is closest to whatever was modeled before. And because a lot of the training data is, quality, I guess, internet content or whatnot, it just kind of sounds like internet writing, right? At least to me.
Yeah.
And I think that's just really fits my need in particular because all I'm doing is internet writing, right? All you're doing is mostly internet writing. So that really makes me happy and it like boosts my productivity, even though all the other, tools might be technically correct, but they just sound so mechanical. And the other thing too, I'll add, and we can pin this for maybe another day that I've been thinking a lot about, is that Chinese as a language, especially the online version of Chinese, it's much more subtle. There are like 3-4 different entendres and, like xieyin and all these other ways to communicate topics that are hard to communicate or maybe are less fun to communicate, right? So one thing I've been thinking about a lot is there just going to be a limit to how good a Chinese chatbot, whether it's Ernie from Baidu or some other AI model would be, because the training data itself that they can access is just more subtle. So the output, it's hard to make the output subtle or precise rather when the training data is so subtle. And that's a very kind of a specifically Chinese internet characteristic, if you will.
Yeah. I mean, my bet is that we're on this weird exponential curve and like anything like that sort of stuff is going to get smoothed out just by scaling what you can train on. It's an interesting question, to what extent like it's like something intrinsic about Chinese, the language itself versus versus like all of the other challenges we talked about export controls or like, not having access to the best algorithms or the best, the best computer scientists or whatever. That's going to be something that may hold Chinese firms back as they're looking to roll out similar technologies to OpenAI.
Yeah. Anyways, that was another that it's been stuck in my brain as a unique characteristic, especially to the Chinese internet per se, right? Maybe not like Chinese, the language itself, but the Chinese internet culture. So yeah, man. This has been fun.
Was something about. Wait, I got one more. So there was something about ByteDance, like I think this was like 2018 or 2019. Zhang Yiming decided that everyone in ByteDance had to learn English. And like they were going to try to run the company in English and have all the senior level meetings in English. And, like a lot of Chinese people, even highly educated ones, are not super comfortable doing English language meetings. And, that was this weird bottleneck. And I think it's something that every global company, a company with global operations struggles with is like, what language are we going to operate in and whatnot. And watching the likes of GPT-4 just really push, just going beyond what we thought was the state of the art with, Google Translate or what have you, and getting us very close to the sorts of Babel fishes where we speak something and it will come out in another language in a sort of, the sound will come out in another language so that you can have like real-time meetings with 10 different people in 10 different languages being able to all communicate with one another. Like we're not that far away from that. And it's a real weird irony that like the tools that would make US and Chinese and just more global sort of international business collaboration are going to be coming precisely at a time where we're leaning towards a much more deglobalized world.
Yeah, I think since synthetically live translating, from one language to multiple language will become a pretty solved problem with AI models very soon. And that will just make any executive, if you're Chinese who wants to run the company in English, so much easier. And one thing I
Yeah.
did here, just as a fun anecdote, is that Liang Rubo, who is the current CEO of ByteDance, Zhang Yiming's bestie and a university roommate, I think, has made it his personal OKR to study English, and that's well publicized within the company. So he is trying.
Yeah, but maybe
he doesn't have to try as hard anymore.
Maybe he doesn't. I don't think he has to try hard anymore. I don't think it's going to be that big a deal. It's so weird. I spent so much freaking time learning Chinese. All of a sudden, I don't like. Do I even need it anymore? Well, I think
you
so.
You still need to be able to read it, right?
Yeah. Yes. I need to. Right. But what I am doing is a very specialized thing. Right. Of like trying to understand like at the like highest possible level of nuance, like U.S.-Chinese relations and politics or whatever. But I think like for any company where like that is not the game you're playing, you're trying to sell widgets, you're trying to sell software, you're trying to, market or this, that, and the other thing. Like you don't need to like get to 100% comprehension. Like you'll be totally fine with 97%. Like I don't think you lose any sort of like business efficiency if you can just get to that place. And that's how, businesses around the world have been running, right? Is like they find someone who's like sort of bicultural or like, is maybe native in one language and like pretty good in the other. And like that's the person they have to set up their local operations. And that person provides a sort of like interface. But those folks aren't linguists, right? They're business people who happen to have some sort of language skills because they studied it or because of their, heritage or what have you. And that having that thing just like not like having like the language. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it'll still matter. Maybe there'll be enough humans in the loop that like, to like figure out what it's going to take to motivate employees in one country or another, or maybe subtle sort of like user habit things. I think the kind of whatever native means will still be important, but there's a lot that won't, which is kind of wild to think about.
Yeah. I think we can both confidently say that drafting and the reading spam marketing code pitches will be so much easier in any language going forward, no matter which country you want to do your business in. Yeah. Sure. With that, thanks, Jordan. Okay. This has been awesome, man. Thanks for having me. Well, we know